Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Translator Bot webinar. We will just wait a few seconds before that we start. And we will just give people a few more minutes to get into the room. And I can see we still have a few people joining, so we will just wait a few more minutes. And I now see that we have a few more that is now attending, and we will start off the webinar. Thank you so much for joining here today. What we are to look into is the Translator Bot and some of the new functionalities that Fujitsu has developed for the Translator Bot. The Translator Bot is an interlinguistic communication in ServiceNow, but it has now evolved to be even more than that, and that is some of the things that we're going to look into. So I'm really, really passionate about being able to talk to you today because this is a extremely powerful tool to go and change the way that people interact out in organizations and how we are communicating with each other, how we can break down some of those language barriers. That's absolutely an awesome tool, and that's what I would present for you today. So what we are going through today is, first of all, we'll just quickly discuss the challenge of what is the challenge that this Translator Bot is addressing. Then we will move into the Translator Bots, because there's more than just one. So kind of give you an overview of the entire portfolio of Translator Bots and how they collaborate. And then finally take a deep dive into 3 areas, which was also what you saw on the registration to this webinar. So there we will go by the go and have a deep dive into how does this encryption bot work? How does the enterprise translation? So this means how do we reach beyond just the ServiceNow application? How can we do translations for Workday, for SAP, and for Salesforce, and other types of enterprise applications? And then finally, we have the knowledge translation bot. The knowledge translation bot is for knowledge articles within the ServiceNow platform and how we can ensure to make them available in all languages. This is kind of the agenda today and what I will be walking through. We will, by the end of this webinar, we have been receiving a few questions up front that we will address. And at the same time, I would also like all of you to write in your questions along the way. We will then address that by the end. So without further ado, I will jump into it. So when we look to the challenges that we are addressing with this translator bot, first of all, we have this very normal situation where you have a requester and a supporter, and they talk 2 different languages. This might be a customer that needs some customer support, or this might be a IT end user needing support from the IT organization, or this might be and this might be a customer who needs to it might be a customer who needs some information from their vendors. So by having these talking 2 different languages, that obviously poses a big challenge. The next thing is that we have a long time to resolution due to bad communication. When we are saying bad communication, we're saying it is very difficult if you are not allowed to communicate in your own first language, or at least if you're not that trained, for example, in English or in Dutch or whatever it might be. If you're not allowed to communicate in a language where you can express yourself in a good enough way, this means that your communication ends up being very bad or very poor, very not rich as such, and therefore it's very difficult to explain what you need your help for, what you need other people to do. And that leads to a very long resolution time to whatever the issue you have might be. The next thing we have is that users do not log tickets or do not ask for help in this case if they are forced to communicate in a language which they just don't feel comfortable in. So this means that it's very important that everyone is communicating where they feel comfortable. We have examples of organization where on their incident side, that means IT incidents, whenever you have an issue, and this is an organization that has outsourced most of their IT, which means that they have Indian support, meaning that the supporters communicate in English, and you would see that the organization is having a demographic that does not necessarily mean that people are that good at English. And it is estimated that up until 40% of all these issues with IT out in an organization is shadow numbers and is never even logged. They don't even know they exist because people are so afraid of getting to talk English to a guy who has an Indian accent, a guy or a lady, which means that they never log this, and that means that the issue will never get resolved. And finally, we also have the situation where we see that many organizations, whenever they want to, for example, do outsourcing, and the organization don't speak that language where they need to outsource to, for example, if they're not that good at English, then they would need to purchase this type of support in many different languages. So especially in global organization, this can become extremely expensive because whenever they need to have a new supporter that speaks a new language, they first of all become very vulnerable to and not as a robust setup if you need to kind of employ new people all the time. And it will not be as consistent, and it will be way more expensive. So those 4 challenges is what we see at the most out of our customers. I'll just try to close this pane. So if we right now look to the Translator Bot. So the Translator Bot, if we start now to the left, is built upon machine learning algorithms. Machine learning is basically having a lot of data, which we are then using to provide some kind of service. So this means as we get more data, the service we provide becomes better over time. So in this case, it's basically the same thing as we are learning the machine learning algorithms to be better at translating. So this means that the translator bot gets better over time. The more it gets trained, the better it becomes. Upon this, it also does a semantic translation. What this means is that it's not a one-to-one lookup dictionary. It is looking to the meaning of the sentence rather than just taking every word out and translating it. So take the meaning of the sentence, maps that, take a new language and say, how would we express the same thing in this language? And thereby it translates. And that's what it does with this interlingua, that it translates, for example, in my case, from Danish to this intermediate language, interlingua, and then into English. For example, there is not that many these machine learning algorithms does not get that well trained between, for example, Danish and Ukrainian, because there's not that many people training that. But as we have this middle station with this interlingua where we map up the meaning of the sentence by having a lot of translations from Ukrainian to English and from English to Ukrainian, it also helps and trains the translator bot in translating from Danish to Ukrainian, even though it hasn't seen that many of these specific scenarios. So that's some of the benefits to this. What we're using and building this upon is the Google Translator. We've done many tests. We have it both on the Google Translator and we have it on the Microsoft Translator. We by far recommend to use the Google. The reason for this is that the Google simply just provides a way better translation, way higher quality in all the tests we've done across all types of translation services. So that's one of the main points. This also means that whenever somebody goes in and uses Google Translate, they also help in training it. So this means that whenever Google Translate is used by any user across the entire world, the translator bot also becomes better. So if we then look into what is the translator bot, the translator bot currently has 7 modules with an additional 8th encryption filter on top of it. We have the conversation translation bot, the chat translation bot, notification translation bot, knowledge translator bot. The platform translator bot can also be used to, for example, translate portals and stuff like this. We have the vendor translation bot and the enterprise translator bot. And then as an additional feature to all of these, we also have an additional bot called the encryption bot. What we will talk about today is the first one is the encryption bot to the top right corner, which is an additional security filter that you can put on all these modules. Then we have the enterprise translation bot. Enterprise translation bot is what enables you to translate not only in ServiceNow, but for the SAP, for Workday, for Salesforce, for all other kinds of applications. And then finally, we will then move to the knowledge translation bot, which is the bot in ServiceNow going in and translating knowledge articles across the platform. So to start out with, I want to start out with our encryption bot. The encryption bot was made because when we have a inherent problem that, especially here in Europe, that if we want to use the best translation engine, Google, and that is by far and indiscussable the best translation engine, it will take data and send over to US, get it translated, and provide that back. There is an inherent data issue with this because we might be writing into our, let's take it for example, an incident, a normal IT incident, saying that we want to translate this. And then you have written your own email in there. I have an issue because my email, matthias@example.com, does not work. Then they have personal sensitive data in this incident getting sent to the US, which then poses a data breach. So what we have done here is that we have made an encryption filter, which basically can go in and look at all sensitive data that you're sending across, encrypt it, so Google will never see it. It will never get outside of your enterprise, never outside of the confinements you have already set, gets translated at Google, get back, and then present it to the customer. So this means let's take the example of having my email is matthias@example.com. I want to translate that to another language. So at the moment when I press, I want to translate this, it basically cuts out my email address, puts in a dummy value instead, send that over to Google, get Google to translate it, get it back into the translator bot, replaces that translation with the original value, and then display it out to the end user. So this means that the end user never have to worry about this. It also means that the end user will have a seamless, very seamless experience in the user interface. So that's where we start out. And without further ado, I will then go in and show you how this works when you have done an implementation of this. Very good. So let's start by going in and making a incident. So I'm now creating a new incident in a platform. And this could be, once again, please remember, this can be any type of record in ServiceNow. This is a platform-wide capability. This works through the portal, through the backend, through any form that you want to apply this to. If you haven't seen what I'm doing now before, there's also a whole webinar that you can find on Google addressing this. So, for example, I write here in my short description, I can write, this is an incident for Matthias. I have a problem with my email. My email is matthias@example.com. I'll then save this ticket. And then I have a user interface where I maybe want to, for example, translate this into Spanish, or translate this, for example, into Dutch. This is how it works. You would see that it basically translates everything, and you would still be able to see words like, for example, Matthias and so on. So this is what the user experiences. This is how it works right through the user interface. As you see, everything happens extremely fast and everything reacts fast. So what I want to ensure now is that I have not sent out any personal information, like, for example, personal sensitive data, for example, like my email address. So what I can do is that I can go to my Translator Bot here in the backend. We have something called encryption configuration. In our encryption configuration, we have gone in and set certain expressions that we would like to ensure we don't send over. So first of all, you can say there are certain words that I never want to translate. For example, we have set incident You can see that we have incident that I also wrote. Never translate the word incident, because that if you translate that into Danish, it might as well, or for example, end up being an issue or problem or something like this. So never translate this. And we also have these regex expressions. So what is a regex? A regex is a regular expression that you, and this is where it becomes a bit technical, but this is where many of your developers, you know that you can have a regular expression. For example, being able to recognize what is an email, or being able to recognize a social security number, or being able to recognize a bank account number. And this is where you can go in and add all these regular expressions as you want to. So you can both use this encryption filter, as you see here, the Encryption Bot, to recognize different types of patterns. You can add as many of these patterns as you want to. You can basically go in and download them from other places in on the internet, find these regular expressions on the internet and then add them here. Or you can use it just to, for example, white label words like, in this case, incident. Never translate the word incident. So, as I've already set this up, activated it both, for example, for the word Matthias, don't translate the word Matthias. Don't even send it over to Google. Don't translate the word incident. And don't translate the regular expression of an email address. So the way we can see this is that if we go into, first of all, our translation history, we will be able to go in here and see that this is an incident for Matthias, and this was what was translated. And the original text of, I have a problem with my email is, and this is what was translated. So this basically shows you the log of everything we have translated. But behind the scenes, even behind this, we also have our encryption log. So if you go in and see what has actually been sent over, that means the one called, for example, final go, what has actually been sent over to Google, it will show you that if you also kind of are able to read through this code, that it takes every time it, for example, says Matthias or it says incident and replaces it with T now and then a number. So this also means when Google returns this, it returns este un incident para Matthias. So this basically shows you that Google has never seen either the word incident or Matthias. So those were kind of the white labeling we did. If we then go up here, you would see that it shows my email is, and then it shows a random number. And basically afterwards showing that this random number is the same as Matthias' example. So when Google are returning this value, it will show, ik heb een probleem met mijn email. My email is, and then a encrypted version of my email address. What the Translator Bot then does is that it recognizes this encryption and replaces that with my email address and then shows that to the end user. So this is basically a way to ensure that not only can we secure our data in the platform, but it also enables us to, right now you have seen every time I needed to do a translation, I pressed a button. But for all you who know ServiceNow, it also means that I could actually just go up into my profile, have something called my preferred translation language, and whenever a free text field is displayed on the in my user interface, it could automatically just translate it. The danger about automatic translation is if it contains sensitive data. But as we now have this encryption bot, that is not a problem anymore. So this is a bot that does not really have as cool a direct financial impact, but what it does is that it enables even more use cases where you can use the translator bots. The encryption bot can be applied across every one of the translator bots. So this means this is applicable to all of them and is an additional filter on all of the other translator bots. The next thing I want to move forward to is our enterprise translation bot that you see here. Our enterprise translation bot. The purpose of this is that we now say we have done this translation bot for the ServiceNow platform, but why not make the same thing available for every other enterprise application? So what you would see here, move to the next slide here, is, I'll just try to move this a bit, there you go, that we have the enterprise translation bot. It will receive, let's say we, for example, make an integration towards SAP or Salesforce or Workday. They want to have something translated. We pass that to the translator bot in ServiceNow, the enterprise translation bot, and the encryption filter on top of it. It could be you can add the encryption filter, that is basically up to you, but you have the enterprise translation, but then takes the values from SAP and from Salesforce and from Workday, passes that over to Google Translate, encrypted, gets it back encrypted, and then decrypts it and sends it over to Salesforce, SAP, Workday, the other application. This is another thing that is extremely valuable. So what does this provide you, this enterprise translator bot? It provides you a centralized translation hub where you can go in and log and find out how many applications are we actually translating from. At the same time, it also provides you this encryption filter, which means that no matter what kind of information that comes out of Workday and of SAP and of Salesforce, we can encrypt it. We can use our regular expressions to say we don't want to send over customer information or employee information and so on and so on. So as long as you have that, you can encrypt that by passing this through the enterprise translator bot. If you very fast then try to create a value calculator on this, we have a value calculator for our enterprise translation bot. Our enterprise translation bot here, let's say that we look to the percentage of all the records in SAP, in Workday, in Salesforce, in ServiceNow even, that this could apply to. This might apply to, let's say, 20% of the cases that we want to count. So there's a bit of scope definition before you can really say this. Let's say that every time you want to communicate to someone in Salesforce, Workday, SAP, whatever it might be, we will save, let's say, 5 minutes, both for the requester or the end user and for the supporter or back-end user, or at least these two numbers are representing two different sides of it. Maybe it's even 7 minutes. Then we have the that was the approximately savings in number of minutes. And then we have the number of tickets. So this means the total number of tickets or translations that we want to translate that could be relevant for this in SAP, in Workday, and in Salesforce. So a total number of tickets per year might, in this case, let's say it's 2 million, and it might be even more. So right now what we have said is that 20% out of these 2 million, let's maybe even just say this is 10% out of the 2 million, it could be relevant for us to translate it. Our cost per hour might be 70, let's try just to make it 50 euros per hour. That still leaves us with a positive business case of 2.3 million euros per year. So what you can see here is that you can always go in and play around with the numbers, so it doesn't have to be like extreme numbers, but even though that we lowball some of these numbers quite a lot, we still end with a very positive business case per year, in this case of a little more than half a million euros per year. So what I'm saying is that these challenges that we were addressing in the beginning here, is such an inherent problem in any organization and in every interaction you would see across a company, that just by benefiting a little across the entire company, you can gain extreme return on investments. From here on, I will then move further on to the last translator bot. So the last translator bot I want to move into is our knowledge translation bot. The case of a knowledge translation bot is, for example, some of our customers is working globally. They then want to present some knowledge. This could be guidelines. This could be standard operating procedures. It could be many things. Could even be like news they want to push out to the entire organization. They want to be able to not only do this in one language, but they want to be able to show this in many languages. This might also be user guides for example, machineries or whatever it might be. So many people might not be able to read these things in English, or especially if we're looking into HR guidelines or employee handbooks and whatever it might be. This can be very difficult to know because there might be a lot of specialized lingo around, for example, HR, around machineries or whatever it might be. And therefore, it can be very difficult to read some of these articles in another language than your own preferred one. So if we are then looking to our translations of the knowledge articles, we will then move to our knowledge setup here. So if we move into our knowledge session in ServiceNow, we can then go into all knowledge articles. So for example, let's take one of these articles that you would see here. So we take any type of knowledge article. Right now, I here have already now, as you see, a text in it. You would also see that we have HTML formatting of this, which means we have differences in the size and so on. So it's not just like a plain string field like this one, but a HTML field. So what I want to do now is I want to add this to certain other languages. So let's, for example, say I want to go down and translate this into Dutch or Spanish. Then I go into my set languages. And then I simply can go in and choose Dutch, add that, and Spanish, add that, and update it. So I've now set this, and as you would see in the bottom under our related lists, I now have two other articles, which is basically child records to this original one in knowledge, both one in Spanish. So you see it has preserved our formatting. It has just translated this into another language. You would also see that it pushes this back right now in the workflow of draft. You could also choose to directly publish it. It depends on whether or not you want to keep your whole review process. You would also see that we have the language set as Spanish. This is also some of the functionality coming with, I think it's called the I-18 internationalization plugin in ServiceNow. So what we can do now is, let's say we want to publish this one, and this looks good. We have now reviewed it, and then we publish it. We then move to the other translated version, the Dutch one, and go in here and see that we have also here capped our HTML description, our HTML formatting. You see our language is Dutch, and we then say, yes, please publish. So what we can do now is that we are now back to our English version. You will see this does not have a parent record, but if we move into the child records, you would see that we have a parent. So it always refers back to the original as the parent. Once again, you could write these in, for example, Danish, and then translate them into English, Dutch, and Spanish. It basically does not care what is the original one and what is that written in. It only cares about the target language. So, for example, how does this then look? That means I can now go in and view the article. You basically see here the English version. I can then go up and change my language to the Spanish version or to the Dutch version. And this is then, of course, also being, it is able to go in and track this up against the user profile and the preferences there. So as you see, this makes knowledge sharing across an enterprise, and especially a global enterprise, so much easier, because you so often meet this issue of having these problems. So translating this kind of text makes a huge difference. Keeping the formatting, which is like half of all the messaging in a text, is also possible. Beware, you could also combine these with other applications. So just imagine, basically is the same thing as saying that all knowledge in an organization can now be shared globally without any delay or any kind of distortion on that understanding. And that's quite unique, and that's what this Translator Bot provides of a completely additional value. If we then look to the case, the business case around this, or the value calculator. So let's say that we operate in an organization with how many number of languages? Let's say we operate across 15 different countries, speaking 15 different languages. Time saved per translation and setup of a knowledge article. So let's say how many hours is saved per knowledge article. That means basically the benchmark of saying, if I needed somebody to go in and write this in the local language, how much would that take me? Let's say it would take 2 hours to translate this. The employee cost might then again be, let's do the 70, and the number of, and the final number of articles. Let's say this is standard operating procedures in a pharmaceutical company. Then we very easily could reach a couple of millions, or it might be guidelines as to how to maintain a factory or different machineries and so on. So let's say we at least have maybe 5,000. This is not unusual, even in just an IT organization. Already there, we are up to 10 million euros per year. So let's just even say it's only 1,000 articles, and it's only 1,000 articles. It's only cost per employee per hour is only 50. We only save 1 hour, and we only have maybe 10 languages. We still save 500,000 euros per year on this. On top of this, there's the whole benefit of everybody understanding each other and being able to share knowledge across a company. And those numbers are way larger than this. This is just the immediate translation effect of the time that we have spent on the translation, and not of all the benefits of the knowledge sharing that comes on top of this. And on top of that, we also have the whole user experience, that people actually experience a completely different company. So that being said, this is our Translator Bot. What we just went through was the Encryption Bot. It was the Enterprise Translator Bot, and it's the Knowledge Translator Bot. The new thing about this is that the Encryption Bot allows you to not worry about your data. It is a way to recognize all kinds of regular expressions, whether it's a bank account, social security number, or email. Every type of kind of identifiable personal information or sensitive information can be kept within your company. We have the Enterprise Translator Bot, which allows you to translate and use the Translator Bot for any other application in your enterprise, and you can add this Encryption Bot on top of this, so we once again ensure that no sensitive data is shared with Google. And then finally, we have our Knowledge Translator Bot, which can translate every kind of standard operating procedure, employee handbook, any kind of guidelines to how to handle, for example, IT, to handle machineries out in factories and so on. You can translate that and share that across the entire company. See, we have very good business cases of value provided from all these, and you even have all the hidden numbers, which might even be way bigger than just the immediate business cases that I just showed you. So with all this defined, this is how Fujitsu is able to shape tomorrow and create a completely new linguistic understanding and collaboration across enterprises. So what we are going to do now is that we are then looking to some of the questions that you might want to be asking. So in the audience, I don't see any questions so far. However, what we can do is that we can then try to answer some of the things that have been asked on forehand. So one of the first questions that we've gotten was, is this translator bot native ServiceNow or partner product like GeoFluent by Lionbridge? This is a product by Fujitsu. This is a product that we have developed in co-creation with a couple of our biggest customers, our biggest ServiceNow customers. So all these use cases that we're talking about and are trying to display to you here is coming from real life scenarios. This is not a native part of the ServiceNow platform. This is something that has been developed way before. There might also be some of you who now have seen that ServiceNow is trying to launch something that reminds a bit about it. So guess where they've gotten that idea. But more or less the whole point about this is that this has been developed for even longer time. We have done this based on Google, and we have these encryption filters, which we don't see anywhere else. So what we get here is that we get the best of both worlds. We get the best translation engine, and we at the same time can protect our sensitive data. That's quite unique for these translation services. At the same time, this is also a way broader portfolio, broader set of scenarios where you can utilize this. The next question I've gotten is, what is the work required by the organization and how much is built in? So when we are implementing this, we will ensure as a part of the price that you're getting is that our experts from Fujitsu will come in and implement it for you. The only thing that you would need to add in this case is go in and choose by just going into, let me give you an example here. If you go into our Translator Bot, the only thing you need to do is do the administration. So you would need to go in and choose which languages should be available. And that's basically after it's been deployed to production, you just go in and enable a language. And the only thing you need to do in this case is to change, let's say we want to add Lao. The only thing you need to do is to go in and add this as true and then set the order to 800, and now it is visible. So this is a type of configuration that you would need to do yourself. Very easily done. As you see, that takes about 5 seconds. The next thing is that you need to do the field setup. So in this case, you need to tell it, should I see it on the incident form? Should I see it on the portal? Where do I want to see these translations? So we don't just like apply it across the entire platform, but you would just need to go in and tell it, like we see in this case. I'll try to open the record. Or basically, as you also see here, that you would go in and have to choose the table, which fields that it should appear on. Should it appear on the activity logs, and then activate it. And that's more or less all that you need to do. And of course, also finally in our encryption configuration, you would need to go in and add regular expressions. So that means as you are identifying which type of sensitive data that you want to be able to recognize, you go in and you add it in here. So the only thing you need to do is having the regular expression patterns. As you see here, you can find these patterns online and then add them just to this list, and then the bot recognizes them. The next question we've gotten is which industries with built-in dictionaries? We do not have any out-of-the-box dictionaries, but just as I showed you before, I have added the word incident, which for example could be very specific for IT, that we don't want to translate the word incident. So thereby I can go in and I can add them here. So I can ensure that it never translates incident. So if you already have a whole list of these industry specific words, it's just about doing one upload into this, which would take you approximately a half an hour or something if you already have the list. And half an hour is if you're not used to do these transform maps, a experienced developer would be able to do it in 5 minutes. Next question. Is this feature a basic license or is it a pro license, a requirement? The only requirement that we have for this is that you have a ServiceNow platform. So it is not required to have a pro license or anything like that. As long as you just have a working ServiceNow system, then this can be implemented. The way that this is charged is based on a one-time off fee. So that means you get the entire translator bot and you get the implementation for a one-time off fee rather than having to pay over and over and over again. Just such, it is delivered as a one-time off. The next thing here is then, we have a final question around, is there more coming to our Translator Bot suite? So at the moment, I can tell you some of the use cases that is quite interesting and that we're working on. First of all, we are constantly working on extending this, and we're doing that in collaboration with our customers. What we see and what has been some of the use cases is, for example, to do translation of catalog items. Very often see a customer having maybe 100, 150 different catalog items with a lot of explanations in them and so on. That can be translated with a blink of an eye. We also see that if you just like the same scenario where you want to translate catalog items, you also want to translate, for example, knowledge articles or your portal. And in that case, we can also do a translation as a part of the platform Translator Bot. We can also do translation based on, for example, just the portal and so on. So there is a couple of different varieties that we have used both within the existing bots, but also that we are developing as new features. And we got another question here. Can the translator being used with chats? Yes, we have a whole session. Not session, but we have a module here in here called the Chat Translator Bot, where it can translate in the Connect chat and basically go in there and show you the translated sentence in your own preferred language. But once again, this is also something that we very often would see packaged with the encryption bot, because you would need to have that automatically translated, and thereby we would need an automatic translation on it, because otherwise we might end up writing things which is sensitive in the chat. Do we have any other questions? If not, I will say thank you so much for your time. If any of you want to reach out to either hear more, to see maybe more about some very specific demos, or you have some use case scenarios that you want to try out, you are always welcome to reach out to me. So in that case, I will just send to all my email address. If you want to reach out and hear more, or have maybe even getting a bit of help to look into your value calculator, to see if there is any business case for you, or if you have any questions around the security of this and how it works, or maybe even pricing and a specific offer on this, we are ready to help all of you. So I've now sent that in the chat. You now have my email, and I will say thank you so much to every one of you for joining, and have an absolutely awesome day.